Freda Josephine MacDonald was born on the 3rd of June 1906 in St. Louis, Missouri. Her father, Eddie Carson, was a vaudeville drummer, yet shortly after Josephine's birth, he abandoned her along with Josephine's mother, called Carrie MacDonald. With her left alone to raise a child, she had to give up her dream of becoming a music hall dancer and worked as a washerwoman. Carrie soon met a kind man called Arthur Martin, and the couple got married. The family grew as Carrie gave birth to a son and 2 more daughters, but this meant they had more mouths to feed, and Martin was always unemployed. The family had very little money. Josephine grew up in a low-income neighborhood, consisting mainly of rooming houses, brothels, and apartments without indoor plumbing. As a child, she was dressed poorly and was frequently hungry, but she did develop a lot of street smarts. Due to her parents struggling to provide for the whole family, she grew up cleaning houses and babysitting for wealthy white families. Supposedly, she started working around the age of 8 in order to support her family and younger siblings. She was often treated poorly, and while babysitting, the families reminded her to not kiss the baby. On one occasion, a woman burnt her hands because she put too much soap in the laundry. As she spent most of her days working, she didn't receive an education after the age of 8. Nevertheless, at around 11 years old, she returned to school, albeit only for 2 years. Then, when she was 13, she ran away from home and got a job waitressing at the old Chauffeurs Club. For a while, she lived in the slums of St. Louis, having to sleep in cardboard shelters and scavenge rubbish bins for food. While working there, she met, and shortly after married, a man named Willie Wells. Despite her being young, Josephine made sure to be always financially independent, something unusual for a woman of her era. Weeks after the marriage, the relationship started to go downhill. Being independent, she didn't hesitate in leaving Willie Wells, despite how tough it could have been for her. It was around this time that Josephine first took up dancing, following the dream that her mother once had. She took after her talents and honed her skills in street performances and clubs. Within months, she was touring the States with the Jones Family Band and the Dixie Steppers, performing a variety of comical skits, and she was only 13. In 1921, Josephine got married for the 2nd time. On this occasion, to a man named Willie Baker. Years later, they divorced, but she decided to keep his last name for the rest of her life. Eventually, she auditioned as a chorus girl for the Dixie Steppers and Blake's production, Shuffle Along. However, she was rejected. The organizer said it was because she was too skinny and too dark. In spite of that, she decided to learn the chorus lines and routines anyway, although it was a lot of hard work, rehearsing as well as working. In 1923, her decision paid off. Josephine landed a role in the musical Shuffle Along as a member of the chorus. While on stage, she rolled her eyes and purposely acted clumsy. It was this comedic touch that made her loved by the audiences. Looking to increase her name in showbiz, she moved to New York City in 1924, where she landed roles on Broadway. First, she performed in the Chocolate Dandies, and then at the Plantation Club, alongside other stars such as Ethel Waters. Again, she was a crowd favourite and grew a good reputation. In 1925, Josephine travelled to Paris to perform in La Revue Nègre at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées. While in Paris, her career thrived. She attracted thousands to her shows, and this was helped by the fact that the French public was obsessed with American jazz, as well as all things exotic. in one particular performance called the Danse Sauvage, in which she only wore a feather skirt. The French audiences were always blown away. During this time, Josephine took steps to tackle racism and discrimination that existed in Europe. To do this, she demanded that her contract contain a non-discrimination clause. This meant that her audiences should be integrated by all people, regardless of race. Although it was only a small step, she would go on to advocate for equal rights on a much larger scale. When La Revue Negre closed, Josephine starred in various shows at the renowned Folies Bergère music hall. It was here that her erotic dancing allowed her to reach true stardom. Her most famous show was called La Folie du Jour, and each time she delivered a jaw-dropping performance. What stood out from other shows was her costume. She would dance wearing a piece made of 16 bananas strung to a skirt. By 1927, Josephine was one of the highest paid performers in Europe. Her talent gained her the admiration of huge cultural figures such as Pablo Picasso, Ernest Hemingway, and E. Cummings. Hemingway said this about her: "She was the most sensational woman anyone ever saw." Furthermore, she rivaled famous film stars of the day like Gloria Swanson and Mary Pickford as the most photographed woman in the world. Her celebrity status led to a series of nicknames, including Black Venus and Black Pearl. Supposedly, while at the peak of her career, she received over 1,000 marriage proposals. Following this success, she landed roles in 2 films. In 1934, she starred in Zouzou, and a year later, in Princess Tam Tam. With her savings from performances and the money she earned as an actress, she purchased a lovely estate which she named Les Milandes, located in the ancient town of Castelnaud-Fayrac in the southwest of France. With her considerable wealth, she paid for her whole family to move to the estate with her, leaving behind their home in St. Louis, Missouri. In 1936, Josephine returned to the United States to star in the Ziegfeld Follies. Although she had found huge success in Europe, she hoped to become a big name in her home country. Yet, this proved disastrous. The American audiences were very hostile, and it seemed that the reason for this was the color of her skin. The racist reaction, not only from crowds, but also from the papers, left her heartbroken. She was soon back in France, and in 1937, Josephine got married for the 3rd time, on this occasion to a French industrialist called Jean Léon. Josephine had now been in France for over 10 years, and although her marriage to Jean Léon only lasted a year, it was enough for her to obtain French citizenship. With the outbreak of World War II, Josephine started to work for the Red Cross. She also attended various events and parties with high-ranking officials from different countries. At these events, she would mingle and use her charm to collect information on the location of German troops. With the occupation of France, she became a member of the Free French Forces. Also, during the 1940s, she travelled to North Africa and various French colonies. On her tours, she kept morale high, entertaining troops by dancing and singing. However, it was while collaborating with the French resistance that she did her most important work. Acting undercover, she smuggled secret messages hidden in her music sheets and even in her underwear. It was also around this time that she had the last of several miscarriages. Because of this, she had to undergo an operation and even developed a nasty infection. After recovering, she continued to entertain soldiers and smuggle messages. For these efforts, she was awarded France's highest military honours, including la Croix de Guerre, la Rosette de la Résistance, and la Légion d'honneur. After the war, Josephine spent various years at her estate. During this time, she married Joe Bouillon, a French orchestra leader. During the 1950s and 60s, Josephine returned to the United States to fight racism and support the civil rights movement. She participated in demonstrations, boycotted segregated clubs, concert venues, and even used her influence to bring to light all the ongoing problems in the States. One time, while in New York with her husband, they were refused reservations at 36 hotels because of racial discrimination. Josephine was so upset by this treatment that she wrote articles about the segregation in the United States. Josephine also criticized various clubs' unwritten policy of discouraging black patrons. She also then scolded an old ally and columnist, Walter Winchell, for not rising to her defense. Winchell responded by criticizing her and even accused her of being a communist sympathizer, which was a serious charge at the time. This resulted in the termination of Josephine's work visa. She had no choice but to return to France, and it was almost a decade until she was allowed back in to her home country. In honor of her efforts, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People named the 20th of May Josephine Baker Day. In 1963, she participated in the March on Washington and was one of the many notable people that spoke out to the huge crowd. One part of her speech that stood out was when she said, "I have walked into the palaces of kings and queens and into the houses of presidents, and much more, but I could not walk into a hotel in America and get a cup of coffee, and that made me mad. And when I get mad, you know that I open my big mouth, and then look out, 'cause when Josephine opens her mouth, they hear it all over the world." A few years prior, she had begun to adopt babies from around the world. In total, she adopted 12 children. She referred to her large family as the Rainbow Tribe. Josephine did this in part to prove that children of different ethnicities and religions could still be brothers. Visitors would often come to the estate and see that what she claimed was more than true. The children were happy and lived together in harmony. In January 1966, Josephine performed at the Teatro Musical de La Habana in Cuba. Fidel Castro had invited her personally to celebrate the 7-year anniversary of his revolution. Her spectacular show broke attendance records. 2 years later, Baker lost her chateau due to unpaid debts. This made front-page news. She had to be forcibly removed from the premises because she wouldn't let it go. Fortunately, her friend, Princess Grace of Monaco, financed an apartment for her and the children to live in. As time passed, Josephine continued to travel back and forth from France to the United States. On one visit, she began a liaison with an American artist called Robert Brady. At this point in her life, Josephine, more than anything, was looking for a platonic relationship. Fortunately, Brady felt the same. As she was now divorced from her fourth husband, Joe Bouillon, she was free to spend time with Brady. In September 1973, the pair traveled to Acapulco, Mexico. While there, they exchanged marriage vows in an empty church. Although legally they weren't married, as no one was present, it was important for the bond that they shared. Josephine kept the events in Acapulco quite secretive, as she believed the press would ridicule it if they ever found out. Later that year, Josephine agreed to perform at Carnegie Hall in New York. Before the show began, she was nervous due to her previously bad experiences while performing in the States. Yet this time, she was greeted with a standing ovation. Her reception was so touching that she wept on stage in front of her audience. In April 1975, at the age of 68, Josephine premiered at the Bobino Theatre in Paris. It was the first of a series of performances to celebrate the 50th anniversary of her Paris debut. At the show, Josephine performed a variety of routines from her long and successful career. The reviews she received were some of her best ever. However, just days later, on the 12th of April 1975, Josephine Baker fell into a coma and died from a cerebral hemorrhage. On the day of her funeral, over 20,000 people lined the streets of Paris to witness the procession. Furthermore, the French government honoured her with a 21-gun salute. This made Josephine the first American woman in history to be buried in France with military honours. In 1991, a movie based on her life was released, called The Josephine Baker Story. The film won 5 Emmy Awards and a Golden Globe. Thank you everyone for watching this video on Josephine Baker. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave me a comment and a like. And if you're new to the channel, why not subscribe? That's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks!